In 1847, a dark and mysterious event occurred in the United States, but for some reason it was erased from history. Few know that the answers to this enigma were right before everyone's eyes. What was at stake, and who dared to hide the truth? The city of Charleston, South Carolina, was silent that autumn morning. Dry leaves danced through the narrow streets, as if the city itself were trying to hide a secret that had long stubbornly remained forgotten. The wind, carrying the scent of the sea, whispered ancient stories, a constant reminder of what was no longer remembered. And in the midst of this silence, a figure emerged who would alter the course of history: Jasper Hawke. An ordinary-looking man with a worn hat and a wool jacket that clung to his body like a second skin, walked down a quiet street. His eyes, however, carried something unusual. They were not the eyes of just any man. Jasper carried an invisible burden, a mission that destiny had imposed upon him. He didn't yet know what was behind it all, but he felt that the pieces were about to fall into place. Jasper's story was one of the many the town preferred not to tell. Born on a small farm in the Virginia mountains, he grew up burdened by tradition and discrimination. Yet he was a sharp-witted man, an observer, someone capable of perceiving what others did not see. And on that cold morning, he was about to discover something that would change everything. He was not alone in his search. What would lead him to the mystery of 1847 was not only the traces of a dark past, but also a name that had echoed in recent weeks: James Langley. Langley was a man who, according to local legend, had mysteriously disappeared in the autumn of 1847. At the time, the town was gripped by rumors of his death, but nothing was ever proven. The case was closed, and over time, people simply stopped talking about him. However, for Jasper, Langley's death always remained a mystery. What happened on that fateful night? Why did a man of such illustrious reputation disappear without a trace? And most importantly, why did no one else seem interested in solving the enigma? It was this restlessness that brought him back to Charleston. After years away, he was now returning to the places where the answers might be buried, waiting to be discovered. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Langley's past was shrouded in silence and shadows, and any attempt to relive that history would be viewed with suspicion. But Jasper had no other choice. He felt viscerally that the key to the mystery lay somewhere right before his eyes. The city of Charleston, with its aging stone buildings and narrow streets, seemed unchanged by time. The people who lived there were still the same, with the same habits, the same beliefs, and often the same lies, as if time had stood still there, leaving behind the traces of a past that refused to be forgotten. Jasper stopped in front of an old antique shop. The smell of old wood and dusty books filled his nostrils. Inside, he could see an elderly man arranging porcelain pieces on a shelf. The man glanced at him briefly and, noticing Jasper's attentive gaze, nodded. "Looking for something specific?" the man asked in a hoarse but curious voice. Jasper hesitated for a moment before answering. "Just looking for some answers." The man smiled as if he understood what he meant, but simply gestured, indicating that the shop was at his disposal. Jasper knew that in that place, hidden among the furniture and souvenirs, might lie the key that would lead him to discover the truth about James Langley. But what he didn't know was that this journey would lead him to dangerous territory, where the truths would be harder to swallow than he imagined. Charleston, with its well-guarded secrets, was not willing to let the past be unearthed. And the more Jasper searched for answers, the further he drifted from the safety of his own reality. Charleston wasn't a large city, but its past was vast. Every street and every corner seemed to carry echoes of an ancient time, when the South was still marked by old disputes and unresolved secrets. It was a city that breathed history, but also a city that preferred to forget certain chapters. The case of James Langley, among all, was the most unsettling of all. His disappearance had been swallowed by the mists of time, and with it, many of those who tried to find answers. But no one seemed to remember how important that man had been to the city. Langley was, at the time, a respected name. The son of a wealthy merchant and landowner, he seemed to have the perfect life. However, his reputation wasn't solely due to his fortune. Langley was also a man of great political influence, having been part of several agreements that shaped the city during the 1840s. He had the power, the wealth, and the position to get what he wanted, but in the autumn of 1847, he simply disappeared. No one saw or heard from him after that night. Jasper remembered the stories he'd heard in his youth. Some people said Langley had been the victim of a political crime. Others speculated he'd been murdered in a love dispute. But to Jasper, none of those explanations made sense. Something else was at stake, and he was determined to find out what. That morning, after leaving the antique shop, Jasper headed to the city archives. He knew the answer wouldn't be in the obvious places, but rather in the forgotten details. The archives were located in Charleston's oldest building, a red brick building, with tall windows dating from the early 19th century. The place was silent, except for the sound of pages being turned and the presence of a few residents who, like Jasper, were seeking some peace and answers from the past. There he was greeted by a young librarian, Lucy Moore, who seemed more interested in keeping quiet than in helping. But something in Jasper's gaze made her hesitate. "Looking for something in particular?" she asked in a soft but cautious voice. Jasper, without wasting any time, replied, "I'm looking for information about James Langley. Anything related to his disappearance. Anything at all." Lucy looked at him for a moment, her expression closing slightly. She knew exactly who he was talking about, but there was something in her demeanor that indicated she wasn't quite ready to bring up the subject. Even so, she led him to a table near the files and began pulling out some dusty folders. "There are many rumors about Langley," she said, opening a folder and taking out some documents, "but nothing conclusive. He was known for his political connections, his wealth, and a few secrets." Jasper snatched the papers from her hands with the urgency of someone who sensed he was facing a crucial clue. As he began to read, one thing became clear. Langley was involved in something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. His business dealings and political influence were merely the surface of something much darker. There were mentions of secret meetings, letters from influential people, and even the presence of a secret society that seemed to operate in the shadows. Lucy, observing Jasper's expression, finally allowed herself to speak more. "He wasn't an ordinary man, Jasper. His death or disappearance, it wasn't accidental. But you'd better be careful. Some truths can be more dangerous than you think." These words echoed in Jasper's mind as he continued to leaf through the documents. He knew that what he was about to discover could be far more complicated and dangerous than he had anticipated. Charleston, with its mysteries, held deeper secrets than he could have imagined. But what baffled him even more was people's reaction to Langley. No one seemed willing to talk about it, as if there were an unwritten order to keep the past buried. And the more Jasper dug, the more he felt that the entire town was trying to keep a big secret. A secret that, if revealed, could change everything. Jasper no longer knew who to trust. The search for answers about James Langley's disappearance had led him down tortuous and increasingly dark paths. The clues, though numerous, seemed to contradict each other, as if something or someone was actively erasing the traces left by Langley. He no longer knew if he was fighting against time or against a greater force that wished to keep the mystery hidden. The city archives revealed more than he expected, but also brought to light a new layer of perplexity. Several documents indicated that Langley had contacts with powerful figures beyond Charleston, but there were also coded messages and enigmas, as if he were being watched all the time. But what intrigued Jasper most was the repeated mention of an old boat, the Savior, who seemed to be at the center of everything. Jasper followed his intuition, believing that the Savior, it was the missing link. The boat had been mentioned in records dating back to 1847, as if it had been used to transport something, or someone, from Charleston out of the city. However, no one knew its whereabouts, not even the boat's owner, Samuel Turner, a weary-looking man with a mysterious past, like many other local inhabitants. The conversation with Turner, though brief, was what you might call revealing, albeit frustrating. The old sailor seemed more inclined to avoid the subject than to share any concrete information. "That boat, it hasn't left port in a long time," Turner said in a hoarse voice, avoiding looking directly into Jasper's eyes. "And people, well, they prefer not to talk about what happened to it." Jasper persisted, asking about the trips of Xavier and if there was anything linking the boat to Langley's disappearance. Turner sighed deeply and for a brief moment seemed to consider saying something. There was something strange about that boat. It wasn't just the owner. There were passengers who weren't on the list. I saw something one night. I don't know if it was a dream or if it was real, but there are things the city prefers to forget." Turner's tone was now more serious, and his words sounded more like a warning than an explanation. Jasper knew he was close to something important, but the fear in the old sailor's eyes indicated that he was dealing with something that might be too dangerous to fully understand. Back at the port, Jasper walked along the docks, observing the empty sea before him. The biting wind carried the salty breeze, but brought no answers. Xavier, he was there, somewhere, but he felt as if the entire city was closing in on him, as if there were an invisible line that no one dared to cross. The feeling of being watched, of being spied on, was palpable. As he pondered his next steps, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the pier. Lucy Moore. She had followed Jasper discreetly, without him noticing, and now she approached him with a worried look. "You're in danger, Jasper," Lucy said, her voice low but clear. "The town doesn't want you to find out the truth. I shouldn't be here, but you need to know something." Jasper looked at her, sensing that she was about to reveal something important, but also fearing what it might mean for his own safety. Lucy looked around, as if checking if anyone was watching them, and gestured for them to move away from the dock. "There's a reason why Langley's case was closed so quickly," Lucy continued, now in an almost whispered tone. "And it's not because of a lack of evidence. The truth about what happened to him goes far beyond what anyone could imagine. I know you're close to discovering something, but you need to stop digging. They won't leave you alone." Jasper, however, was determined. He wouldn't stop until he knew the truth. Lucy's warning only reinforced his conviction. The town was hiding something, and he was beginning to believe that Langley, with his death or disappearance, was at the center of a web of secrets so deep it could shake the town to its core. Lucy hesitated for a moment, as if considering telling him something more, but seeing Jasper's resolute look, she simply sighed and walked away. "Be careful, Jasper," was all she said, before disappearing into the night mist. Jasper stood there alone, the weight of Lucy's words echoing in his mind. He was about to delve even deeper into a mystery that could destroy him, but there was no turning back. Whatever had happened to Langley, he needed to find out, and he was prepared to face whatever it was, even if the price was too high. Jasper no longer knew who to trust. Every step he took seemed to push him deeper into a web of intrigue and manipulation. The city of Charleston, which until then had seemed like just an ordinary place, was transforming into a labyrinth of lies and secrets, with people willing to do anything to keep the truth buried. And with each new piece of information he uncovered, he found himself more involved in something bigger than he had ever imagined. The visit to the city archives and the conversation with Lucy had only been the beginning. The clues were multiplying, but at the same time, everything seemed to be confusingly intertwined. He no longer knew what was genuine and what was fabricated. Everyone seemed to have some connection to James Langley, but strangely, everyone also had something to hide, as if each piece of the puzzle was being kept by someone who preferred that the mystery remain unsolved. Lucy Moore, though she had shown some hesitation when speaking about Langley, seemed to be the only person willing to offer any help, however indirect. She had warned him to stop digging, but Jasper knew she wasn't just concerned about his safety. She knew more than she let on, but what prevented her from being completely honest with him? Jasper began to suspect that Lucy was connected to something bigger, something she wasn't willing to reveal. The way she avoided looking him in the eye when talking about certain things, the fear that came through in her words, indicated that she too was being pressured by unseen forces. But why did she continue to help him, even hesitantly? The answer lay somewhere in her past that she didn't yet want to share. Meanwhile, old Samuel Turner also seemed to be hiding something. His reaction when the boat savior, the mention, did not go unnoticed. He knew more than he was willing to tell. Jasper felt that this man held the key to unlocking Langley's enigma, but something prevented him from speaking. Perhaps fear was greater than the need for redemption, or perhaps the old sailor was simply immersed in a web of commitments that bound him to powerful people. The city, like a living organism, moved and breathed to the rhythm of its secrets, and any attempt to unearth them seemed to cause unease among the residents. Jasper soon realized he wasn't dealing with just a personal matter involving Langley. There was something much bigger at stake, perhaps a conspiracy or a web of corruption involving important figures in Charleston and even from outside the city. Langley's disappearance seemed to be just the tip of the iceberg, and what Jasper was about to discover could shake the foundations of the entire city. However, what truly surprised him was when he received an anonymous letter left on his doorstep one night. With no return address, the letter contained only an enigmatic message. Be careful what you seek. Not all secrets need to be revealed. Jasper knew he was at the center of something far more dangerous than he imagined. The city, its people, even those who seemed to be allies, were all somehow involved in this game. The letter's contents, while threatening, also provided a crucial clue. It referenced a specific location, the old barn on the Langley farm, which was on the outskirts of town. Jasper had never heard of this barn, but the letter made it clear that it was important. This was the key he needed to take the next step in his investigation. The following morning, he drove to the location indicated in the letter, feeling the weight of what was to come. Langley Farm, now almost in ruins, was far from the city, surrounded by tall, dense trees. The wind blew strongly, as if nature itself were trying to drive him away from that place. When he arrived at the barn, he saw a dilapidated building with rusty doors and broken windows. The building seemed deserted, but Jasper knew that this was where the answers were hidden. He entered cautiously, smelling the musty odor of old wood and mold. Inside, the shadows seemed to move, as if the barn itself were guarding secrets from a bygone era. And it was there, amidst those dusty walls, that he found something that left him speechless, an old, locked wooden box hidden among the ceiling beams. That was what he was looking for. But what lay inside might be the biggest secret of all. Jasper felt the weight of the wooden box in his hands. It was locked, but something inside him told him it was the key to unlocking the whole mystery of James Langley. The sound of the wood creaking under his fingers as he tried to open the latch seemed to echo through the barn walls, a sign that the secret was finally about to be revealed. With effort, he managed to open the box, revealing its contents. A series of old letters and documents stained by time. Touching the pages, he felt a connection to the past, as if he were touching something that shouldn't be touched. The letters were written in fine handwriting, but the words seemed almost illegible due to wear. However, Jasper managed to decipher enough to understand that they were related to a conspiracy involving the most powerful figures in the city. Among the papers was a letter dated 1847, around the same time Langley disappeared. It was written by someone named E. The content was clear, but disturbing. Langley knows too much. He's about to uncover the truth about what happened to society. What we've started can't be stopped. If he continues his investigations, he will be removed. The city needs to remain at peace, and any threat to that peace must be eliminated. Jasper felt a chill run down his spine. The words were clear. Langley had been killed because he was about to reveal something that threatened a powerful organization. But what exactly was being hidden, and who was behind it? He continued to rummage through the box, finding more letters and documents that referenced something called the Society of Shadows. There weren't many details about this society, but the name seemed to resonate with power and mystery. Langley's connection to this organization was now evident, but the implications were terrifying. Who else was involved, and why did he, Jasper, now have this information? As he absorbed the contents of the letters, he began to sense a presence. The air seemed thicker, and the shadows on the barn walls appeared to move unsettlingly. He knew he was no longer alone. Someone was watching him. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps made his heart race. Jasper turned, but the only thing he saw was a shadowy figure approaching, shrouded in a dark cloak. The person was so silent, it seemed to emerge from the darkness itself. "You shouldn't have come here, Jasper," said the cold voice, revealing itself to be a woman's. Her eyes were dark, emotionless, and her posture indicated that she did not fear Jasper's presence. Era Lucy. Jasper tried to understand what was happening. He never imagined Lucy was part of it. He always knew she was hiding something, but he never thought she was connected to the Society of Shadows. But now, facing her, everything made sense. Her hesitation, her fear, the way she avoided telling him everything, all of this indicated that she was deeply involved. "Lucy, you—" Jasper tried to speak, but the woman interrupted him. "Yes, Jasper. I'm part of this. I was assigned to oversee your investigation. You're playing with forces you can't understand. And if you continue, there's no turning back. These people, this society, they have power beyond your imagination. And Langley was just an obstacle that was removed." Jasper felt the pressure of his words. He was in danger, not only because he had unearthed a secret, but because he had now become part of a dangerous game. And he was just a pawn. "Did you know all along, Lucy? Did you know what was happening with Langley and let me believe you were helping me?" Lucy hesitated for a moment, looking at him with an expression difficult to decipher. Finally, she spoke, but her voice was heavy with sorrow. "I tried to stop you, Jasper. I tried to stop you from getting this far, but there's no going back now. Now that you know, there's no choice. You will become a threat, and they won't hesitate to eliminate you." The silence that followed was heavy. Lucy's revelation wasn't just a betrayal, it was a condemnation. Jasper knew he didn't have any more time. He couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even her. The Langley mystery wasn't just about his disappearance. It was about something much bigger, something that involved every aspect of the town, and he was now part of it, perhaps like the last piece of a much larger puzzle. The only thing he knew for sure was that the truth he sought would not only set him free, but could also be his death. But he had no choice. The game was underway, and he was more involved than ever. Jasper felt the weight of Lucy's revelation crushing him. Every word she had spoken seemed like a death sentence, not just for him, but for everything he thought he knew about the world he lived in. The city, its people, its stories, everything was entangled in a web of lies, and he was now a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. As Lucy walked away, her words echoed in Jasper's mind, adding further pressure to his shoulders. He was now facing an unsolvable dilemma. Should he reveal what he knew about the Society of Shadows? This could pit him against powerful figures in the city, figures who seemingly had complete control over everything around them. But, on the other hand, the truth seemed to be the only way out. Back in the city centre, Jasper felt people's stares, but none of them seemed to have anything to do with what he was experiencing. They continued their lives as if nothing had happened, ignoring the fact that the city was shrouded in a deadly secret. The streets of Charleston, which had once seemed peaceful and full of life, now felt empty and cold, as if the very air was laden with something invisible and dangerous. He searched everywhere for answers, but now he felt that the truth was becoming a curse. The clues he had discovered in the barn, Langley's letters, and the documents from Society of Shadows, they were piled up in front of him, but he knew he couldn't just go around telling everyone what he'd learned. This organization was much larger and more dangerous than he'd imagined. As he walked through the streets, his mind was clouded, but one thing was clear: he could no longer trust anyone. Lucy, with her innocent and cautious appearance, had revealed herself to be part of something he couldn't even fully comprehend. The traitor had distanced herself, but the memory of her cold, implacable eyes still haunted his vision. She had warned him indirectly, but also made it clear that he was now a target. His first reaction was to seek out Samuel Turner again. The old sailor, who until then seemed more immersed in his own fears than willing to help, might be the only person who still knew something about the Society of Shadows. When he arrived at the old port, the atmosphere seemed denser, as if the place itself were conspiring against him. Turner was there, in the same spot where he had found him before, his face marked by age and suffering. But now, seeing Jasper, his expression changed. He knew what was happening. It was as if the old sailor had been waiting for this moment. Without saying a word, he made a silent gesture for Jasper to follow him. In the back of the old antique shop, Turner finally spoke. "I knew you'd make it this far, Jasper. I knew destiny would bring us to this point. But now you need to understand one thing. Something much bigger is happening, something that goes beyond you and me." Jasper listened intently, his hands sweaty, his heart racing. Fear and the need to understand were present, like a force propelling him forward. Langley wasn't just an obstacle, as they said. He discovered something that was beyond our control. What did you find in the letters? It's not just a threat. It's a pact, a promise that everything we do now is destined to fail. "They're ready for anything, Jasper." The gravity of Turner's words sent shivers down Jasper's spine. He was, without a doubt, at the center of something bigger than he could comprehend. The old sailor, a man who seemed to have the situation under control, now appeared as lost as he was. "The city hasn't been the same since Langley disappeared, Jasper. A Society of Shadows, it may be invisible, but it's everywhere. And you, in turn, are the last piece of the puzzle. Now, there's no turning back. They know what you know, and your life hangs by a thread." Jasper sat down, the shock of the words affecting him deeply. He had asked too many questions, dug too deep. Now he was being dragged into an underground current, not knowing where it would lead him. What could he do now? How could he stop what was already in motion? The truth would set him free, but it would also condemn him. The reactions began to emerge with overwhelming force. The threats became more explicit, the pressure more unbearable. Jasper became a target, not only because Society of Shadows, but also by the very people he had thought were his allies. Now he had to decide. Would he remain silent, protecting the city and his own life, or would he face the storm that was about to break over him? The city was about to be shaken, and the consequences of what he knew could destroy everything he had known until now. Samuel Turner's words had reverberated in Jasper's mind like a bell, its sound heavy and inescapable. The truth he sought, though already partially revealed, still seemed to distort and slip through his fingers. Society of Shadows, the pact Langley had discovered, the threat hanging over his life, all of this consumed him. But more than that, he now faced a choice that forced him to evolve in ways he had never imagined. Jasper knew that from that moment on, his life would never be the same. He was at a point of no return. The fear, though present, was beginning to give way to a new determination. He needed to understand what was behind the Society of Shadows, and more importantly, he needed to protect the city, even if it meant defying everything he knew. The first step in his transformation was to move away from conformity. Jasper could no longer be the man who accepted things as they were. He had already begun his journey in search of answers, but now, more than ever, he knew that he wasn't just investigating an old disappearance. He was challenging an entrenched power system, something that had existed for generations, that not only controlled Charleston, but also had influence over the fate of many other cities and regions. With renewed resolve, Jasper began to piece together the fragments that had been scattered throughout his journey. He knew that Xavier, the boat Langley had used to escape, was crucial. Samuel Turner, the old sailor, still possessed valuable knowledge about the boat's clandestine routes and the passengers who traveled on it. Turner, though fearful, now found himself in a position where Jasper's collaboration might be the only way to end this secret network. He also knew that if he remained silent, the consequences for both of them would be fatal. One night, when the city of Charleston was shrouded in the silence of the early morning, Jasper met with Turner again. The old sailor was more open than ever, as if he had finally decided to confront the ghosts of his past. Together, they began to devise a plan to discover what had really happened in Xavier and eventually expose the secret society that was behind it all. Turner, who knew the sea and its secrets well, revealed something crucial. There was an ancient sea route that Xavier he used it to conceal his voyages, a point on the coast where ships were not easily detected. This route had been one of the greatest secrets of Society of Shadows. No one outside his inner circle knew of its existence. Turner also mentioned an old lighthouse, now in ruins, that stood on a secluded island where Langley had last been seen before disappearing. Jasper knew this was the next step in his journey. If he wanted to uncover the truth, he would have to confront the unknown, something that terrified him more than anything else, but he couldn't turn back now. The search for answers was in his bones, and the only way to find peace was by confronting the ghosts buried in Charleston's past. When they arrived at the isolated island, the scene was even grimmer than Jasper had imagined. The abandoned lighthouse, its broken structure covered in moss, looked like a monument to something long lost. But even so, it was the only place where the truth could be hidden. They entered the lighthouse, where a rusty staircase led to the tower, still standing despite the destruction around it. When they reached the top, Jasper saw something that made him stop for a moment, a set of old documents hidden in a secret compartment. It was there, in the silence of that tower, that the truth was finally before his eyes. What he found were more records of Society of Shadows and Langley. The man he had been searching for so long hadn't disappeared by accident, nor had he been the victim of a simple political conspiracy. Langley was about to reveal a network of corruption and manipulation that stretched throughout the region. He had been killed because he was about to expose the true intentions of the secret society. They wanted to control the entire arms and slave trade network that passed through Charleston, keeping power in the shadows. Jasper felt the weight of the truth like a cold blade. He now knew he was no longer just trying to solve a mystery. He was dealing with the foundation of one of the largest illegal power networks in American history. He couldn't simply walk away and leave it all behind. The city he loved, the place he had called home, was entangled in something far bigger and more terrifying than he had ever imagined. But with knowledge came power, and now Jasper had the weapons to fight against what threatened everyone's freedom. He had begun his journey as an ordinary man, but now, faced with the truth, he was someone different. He was no longer just a spectator of a story. He was the protagonist, ready to fight against the shadows and ensure that the lies were exposed. Jasper felt the weight of truth in his hands. The discoveries made at the lighthouse had transformed him, but they had also left him more vulnerable. What he knew now was not just a matter of personal survival. The city of Charleston, the destiny of thousands of people, was at stake. The power he had revealed was not something that could be easily destroyed. Society of Shadows, it had deep roots, and confronting this organization would require more than just courage. It would require a plan, a strategy. But how could he act when shadows cast all around, even among the people he knew? Lucy, Samuel, Turner, the figures he believed to be trustworthy, all were now at the center of this power game. He could no longer trust anyone, but he also knew he couldn't go on alone. The city was about to enter a critical phase. Jasper knew that, in order to dismantle the Society of Shadows, he would need Langley's evidence, the letters, the records, but also allies. But who? Anyone could be an enemy in disguise. What he needed was a direct confrontation, where the truth would be exposed for all to see, without doubt, without manipulation. The first part of his plan was clear. He needed to take everything he knew to the press, exposing the secret society's actions and manipulations to the public. But the biggest challenge was ensuring he wouldn't be silenced before he had a chance to act. He knew the society had people everywhere, and that a single misstep could be fatal. Jasper sought a contact within the local media. He knew he couldn't trust just any journalist, but he remembered one figure who, in the past, always seemed to have an ethical stance: Catherine Rivers, an investigative reporter with a history of exposing corruption in Charleston. But she was at the center of the city's politics and might be, at the very least, cautious, if not entirely distrustful. When he met Catherine at a secluded cafe, her face was serious, as if she already knew what he was about to say. "You're after something big, Jasper." "I know it, no matter how hard you try to hide it," she said, after he took the initiative to reveal the truth. "But you have no idea what's involved here. They have the power, the control. It won't be easy." She was right. Society of Shadows, it wouldn't be easily defeated. Even with the evidence he had, it would take more than just revealing it. The system was structured in such a way that if he simply handed over the evidence, he could be discredited. Jasper knew he would need a bold move, something that challenged the very foundation of the city and that couldn't be ignored. Catherine, though skeptical, saw something in his eyes that made her reconsider. "You're right to want to expose this, but for it to work, we need to do it at the right time, in the right place. And furthermore, you'll need more evidence. More than just documents. We need testimonies. We need something they can't refute." Jasper knew this meant more risk. The lives of everyone involved in this plan would be in danger, but he couldn't stop now. He couldn't abandon everything he had discovered. The only way to ensure that Society of Shadows, if it were to be destroyed, it would be through a public confrontation, a complete exposure. Before he could say more, the conversation was interrupted. A familiar figure appeared in the cafe doorway, and his heart leaped as he recognized her. Lucy. She seemed strangely calm, but her eyes didn't lie. She knew he was planning something big. "You're going too far, Jasper," she said, her voice low but full of a deadly warning. "If you continue, the city will never be the same. I warned you, but you wouldn't listen." Jasper didn't know what to answer. It was clear that Lucy was conflicted. She knew the truth, but still refused to help. She was caught between two opposing forces, and he knew that on some level she understood what was at stake. But now, more than ever, the choice was his. "I can't stay silent any longer, Lucy. I know too much already. The city is at risk, and that's bigger than any of us," he said, his voice firm. She remained silent for a moment, as if weighing her words. But then she turned away, making it clear that her support was lost. Jasper knew what that meant. Now he was truly alone. There would be no one else to turn to. He had a plan, but time was against him. He needed to act quickly, gather the remaining evidence, and rally the allies who still trusted him. Every move now needed to be calculated, and he knew there was no more room for error. The battle was about to begin. Charleston was silent. It was an eerie stillness, as if the city knew something big was about to happen, but hadn't yet figured out what. Jasper felt the weight of every step he took through the streets. He knew there was no turning back, that the confrontation was imminent. Everything he had discovered, all the clues he had followed, now converged on a single point: the great revelation. The city's press room was packed, but his eyes were focused on only one thing: the projection screen where he would make his final move. Catherine Rivers beside him had a serious expression, aware that this could be the end for both of them, but also knowing that it was their only chance to defeat the Society of Shadows. The evidence was organized: letters, documents, recordings, everything they needed to expose the corruption and power games that had been happening right under their noses all along. But upon entering the room, the feeling of being watched was instantaneous, as if all the walls had ears. As if the society, it was drawing closer with each passing second to erase everything he was about to reveal. Jasper didn't have time to get lost in those thoughts. He knew what he needed to do. "Let's put this on the air," Catherine said, her voice firm but with a hint of apprehension. She knew the risk they were taking, but it was too late to turn back. Jasper glanced one last time at the screen and took a deep breath. As he pressed the button to display the images and documents, a feeling of relief and terror washed over him. The first letter appeared, followed by others, each more incriminating than the last. Langley's words echoed through the press room, while the truth about the Society of Shadows it was beginning to unravel. The political manipulations, the illicit deals with local businesses and politicians, and most importantly, the network of control that stretched throughout the city. It was all there, exposed for all to see. But just as the last documents began to be displayed, a firm knock on the door of the room brought everyone to a halt. A man entered, his presence imposing and cold. It was the mayor of the city, Edward Harrington, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, a group of masked men entered, some armed, others with fury etched on their faces. Jasper felt a chill run down his spine. He knew what this meant. They were there to stop them, to ensure nothing was exposed. "That's not going to happen, Jasper," Harrington said, his voice heavy with veiled threat. "You have no idea what's really at stake. This isn't just about Charleston. It's about something much bigger." Jasper stood still, his face hardened by determination. He knew he was cornered. There was no escape now. They could silence his voice, erase his memory, but he had already accomplished his mission. The truth was out there. It was in the air, and nothing could stop it from spreading. "You can try to silence me, Harrington," Jasper said, his voice firm, "but what's done is done. The city will see the truth, and you can't hide it anymore." At that moment, the tension in the room intensified. Catherine was beside him, looking at the men at the door, her eyes conveying a mixture of fear and courage. She knew that, somehow, they had already won. The media had begun to capture everything. The images, the documents, Harrington's very presence there were proof enough to ensure that regardless of what happened, the Society of Shadows, she would be exposed. Harrington, furious, approached the table and with a gesture signaled to his men. But before any action could be taken, something unexpected happened. The door opened again, this time revealing a familiar figure: Lucy. She entered with an almost supernatural calm, but her gaze was distant, as if she had finally made a decision. She looked at Jasper, then at Harrington, and finally spoke. "It's not too late. This has already happened. The city will never be the same, no matter how hard you try." Jasper was shocked. Lucy, the woman he had so doubted, was now by his side, declaring war on Society of Shadows. She was no longer with them, but with him. She had finally broken free from the fear and loyalties that had imprisoned her. I can't let this happen. If you want to silence the truth, you'll have to go through me," Lucy continued, her tone resolute. "I know this means everything, but I also know there's no going back now." The situation was tense. But at that moment, the truth finally prevailed. Harrington's men hesitated. They could attack, but they knew they were being watched by everyone. The press, now full of attentive journalists, wouldn't allow another crime to go unpunished. Their game was about to end. Lucy looked at Jasper, and he felt a relief he hadn't expected. She was free, but he knew they weren't out of danger. Society of Shadows, they still had power, but now they were exposed. The fight was only beginning, but for the first time, Jasper believed he could win. Charleston was never the same again. The confrontation in the press room, with the documents of Society of Shadows exposed to the whole world. It was the culmination of an invisible battle that had been raging for generations. Jasper knew that the process of destroying this power network wouldn't be immediate, but the seed of revolution had already been planted. The city now knew the truth, and that was the first step towards change. Harrington and the other members of the secret society, though they tried to resist, were losing ground. The media, which had previously been a silent accomplice, was now completely on the side of the truth. The evidence was undeniable, and the public pressure was irresistible. Jasper, even having faced death up close, felt a strange relief. He had accomplished his mission, but he knew that the real work was only beginning. Lucy, with the courage of someone who had finally broken free from her own nightmare, became an essential figure in this movement. She had become not just an ally, but a leader who, by confronting her own demons, managed to unite others around the cause. Jasper knew that without her, perhaps none of this would have happened. Mayor Harrington was arrested, as were many of his allies. But even with these victories, Jasper refused to believe that everything was resolved. He knew that the shadows, though now exposed, still lingered, and that the fight for truth and justice would be long. Society of Shadows, it was just one of the many shadowy forces that controlled Charleston's destiny, and corruption was deeply rooted in the city's most profound structures. With the support of Catherine Rivers and other journalists, Jasper continued his investigation, now more focused than ever. The city still had much to learn, and many mistakes to correct. But for now, the greatest triumph had been achieved. The truth had prevailed. He turned away from the city center, walking through streets that now, at least for a brief moment, seemed more alive, more honest. The weight of responsibility still rested on his shoulders, but he knew that most of the burden had already been lifted. His journey, which had begun with the search for answers about Langley, was now in a new stage. He would no longer be the man desperately seeking the truth. He would now be the guardian of that truth, ever attentive, ever vigilant. And as the sun set over the city, Jasper looked at the horizon and felt that, however far the war was from over, he had taken the first step toward ushering in a new era for Charleston. Years have passed since the great confrontation in Charleston. The city, now free from the clutches of Society of Shadows, began to rebuild its foundations. Jasper continued his work, now as a respected figure, a leading advocate for truth and justice. Lucy, though she had stepped away from the public eye, became a community leader, always seeking new challenges. The town would never be the same again, but its inhabitants, now more aware, worked to ensure that the shadows would not return. Langley's legacy and Jasper's struggle would remain alive for future generations. Now that you know Jasper's story and his fight against the Society of Shadows, we want to know, what do you think happens to cities that hide their secrets? Is there a truth you think still needs to be revealed? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us how you think the fight for justice can continue in a world where shadows still try to control the future. Join the conversation and help spread the truth. After all, change begins when we decide to see beyond appearance.